We have an overbooking situation. The flight attendant Brenda said, her smile not reaching her eyes. To her, the 20-year-old black student was an easy target to move for the white businessman who hadn't even paid for first class. As she threatened Zaria with removal, Brenda was oblivious to a critical fact: the girl's father was Calvin Johnson, founder of a tech giant, and the airline's largest minority investor. The quiet phone call Zaria was now making wasn't just to her dad. It was a direct line to a man whose influence could suspend the entire crew. Miami International Airport buzzed with summer travelers as Zara Johnson wheeled her designer luggage through the gleaming terminal. At 17, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her chin held high despite the stares that followed her. Today marked the beginning of her dream trip to New York City for Columbia University's prestigious pre-law summer program. The acceptance letter had arrived 6 months ago, but the first-class ticket in her hand was an unexpected graduation gift from her father, Marcus Johnson. As Skyline Airways' chief legal officer for 15 years, Marcus had earned every perk, though he rarely used them. But for his only daughter's journey to follow in his legal footsteps, nothing but the best would do. "You've earned this," he had told her that morning, pressing the premium boarding pass into her palm. 15 straight A's valedictorian and Columbia calling. Fly like the queen you are. The check-in counter loomed ahead, staffed by a blonde woman with a practiced smile that faltered slightly as Zara approached. "Good morning," Zara offered, politely sliding her ID and ticket across the counter. "I'm checking in for flight 1287 to JFK. The agent, whose name tag read Karen, glanced at the documents, then at Zara, then back at the papers with narrowed eyes. "First class?" she asked, her tone making it sound more like an accusation than a question. "Yes?" Zara confirmed, maintaining her smile despite the familiar twist in her stomach. This wasn't the first time her presence in premium spaces had been questioned. "May I see another form of ID?" Karen requested, though Zara's driver's license lay directly in front of her. Wordlessly, Zara produced her student ID. Karen examined both cards side by side, as if searching for inconsistencies. "And who purchased this ticket?" "My father," Zara answered, her voice steady, despite the heat rising to her cheeks. She wasn't obligated to explain, but experience had taught her that cooperation was faster than confrontation. "I see," Karen said, typing something into her computer with unnecessary force. "And what does your father do that he can afford first class for a teenager?" Before Zara could respond, another employee leaned over and whispered something to Karen, who suddenly straightened up. "Oh, I see," she said, her tone shifting dramatically. "Johnson, as in Marcus Johnson." When Zara nodded, the woman's demeanor transformed instantly. "Well, why didn't you say so? We're delighted to have you flying with us today, Ms. Johnson." The boarding pass was processed with suspicious efficiency, and Zara was directed to the premium lounge with effusive instructions. As she walked away, she heard Karen hiss to her colleague, "You could have told me she was one of those Johnsons." In the exclusive lounge, Zara sank into a plush chair and texted her father. "Made it through check-in. The usual questions about whether I belong in first class until they realized who you are." Marcus's reply came quickly. "I'm sorry, baby girl. Proud of how you handle it. Remember, you belong anywhere you choose to be. Safe flight. Call when you land." Zara pocketed her phone and tried to enjoy the complimentary refreshments, but she could feel eyes lingering on her from various corners of the lounge. As the only black teenager in a sea of predominantly white business travelers, she stood out despite her expensive blazer and carefully straightened hair. A life of being Marcus Johnson's daughter had taught her that no amount of wealth could fully shield her from prejudice, only change its expression. When boarding was announced, Zara gathered her belongings and approached the gate. The attendant, a middle-aged woman named Vanessa Miller, looked up with the same reflexive smile that dropped a fraction upon seeing Zara. "First-class boarding," Zara said, extending her ticket. Vanessa took the boarding pass and studied it with exaggerated care. "This is a premium ticket," she stated flatly. "Yes, I'm aware," Zara replied, maintaining her composure. "May I see your ID, please?" Vanessa requested, though Zara had already placed her driver's license alongside the boarding pass. "It's right there," Zara pointed out. Vanessa examined it closely, then looked up at Zara, then back at the ID. "This is you." "Yes, that's me," Zara confirmed, feeling her patience beginning to fray. "One moment," Vanessa said, stepping aside to consult with another staff member. While gesturing at Zara's documents, they whispered together, occasionally glancing in her direction with undisguised suspicion. Other passengers began to line up behind Zara, their irritation palpable as the minutes ticked by. Finally, Vanessa returned accompanied by her colleague. "We just need to verify this ticket," the male attendant explained. "Sometimes young people try to upgrade themselves inappropriately." "I didn't upgrade myself," Zara stated firmly. "This is the ticket my father purchased for me. You've seen my ID. Is there a problem?" Their hesitation was interrupted by an older gentleman who stepped forward from the priority boarding line. "Excuse me, is there an issue here? Some of us have connections to make." The staff immediately turned to him with genuine smiles. "So sorry for the delay, sir. Just a minor verification issue." "Well, get on with it," he huffed, "or let the rest of us board." Under pressure, Vanessa reluctantly scanned Zara's boarding pass. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Johnson," she said stiffly as the gate beeped its approval. With her head held high, Zara walked down the jet bridge, texting her father again. "More drama at the gate, but I'm boarding now. Seems like the worst is over." Once seated in the luxurious first-class cabin, Zara allowed herself to relax slightly. The seat was spacious, the amenities lavish, and for a moment, she could almost forget the indignities of check-in and boarding. She snapped a quick selfie for her friends who had been eagerly following her journey to Colombia. As other first-class passengers boarded, Zara noticed the flight attendants whispering and pointing in her direction. One woman whose name tag identified her as Melissa approached with a tray of pre-flight beverages, but conspicuously skipped Zara's row before offering drinks to the passenger behind her. When Zara raised her hand to request service, Melissa pretended not to see her busying herself with checking overhead compartments. The message was clear. Despite her ticket, Zara was not seen as deserving of the same service as other premium passengers. The final first-class passenger to board was an older white man in an immaculate suit whom Zara recognized as the impatient gentleman from the gate. Richard Holloway, as the crew addressed him, was clearly displeased about something, gesturing emphatically as he spoke in hushed tones with the head flight attendant near the cockpit door. Occasionally, his gaze drifted toward Zara's seat, his expression calculating and cold. As the economy passengers filed past, Zara caught fragments of the crew's conversation. "Diamond Elite member, 30 years loyal customer. Special consideration, appropriate accommodations." The words were professional, but the meaning seemed ominous as Holloway continued to glance in her direction with growing irritation. Zara's instincts, honed through years of navigating predominantly white spaces, told her that the relative peace she'd achieved might be very temporary. Indeed, as the cabin door closed and the safety demonstration began, she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was about to become far more turbulent than any weather could cause. The aircraft had just reached cruising altitude when head flight attendant Bradley Carter unbuckled his seatbelt and made his way directly to Zara's seat. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he leaned down, voice deliberately hushed, yet still audible to nearby passengers. "Miss Johnson, I need to speak with you about a seating issue." He began, his tone falsely apologetic. "It appears there's been a system error with your reservation." Zara looked up from her book, immediately alert. "What kind of error?" "My boarding pass assigned me to this seat." Bradley smiled, tightened. "Yes, well, sometimes the system makes mistakes. We need to relocate you to economy class to accommodate. A priority passenger." "Priority passenger." Zara repeated, confusion evident in her voice. "I have a confirmed first-class reservation that my father purchased months ago. There's no mistake." By now, several nearby passengers were watching the interaction with undisguised interest. Bradley's voice dropped even lower. Listen, we have a Diamond Elite member who requires this specific seat. Surely you understand that some passengers are more valuable to the airline than others. The implication hung in the air, bold and ugly. Zara felt her heart pounding, but kept her voice steady. I understand that I have a valid ticket for this seat, which I'm currently occupying legally. May I see the supposed system error you're referring to? Bradley straightened, his friendly demeanor evaporating. Young lady, this isn't a negotiation. We need this seat for Mr. Holloway. And there's a perfectly good seat waiting for you in economy. Zara, drawing on years of watching her father handle difficult situations, reached for her phone. I'm going to record this conversation for my own protection, since you're asking me to give up a seat I legally purchased. Recording is against airline policy. Bradley snapped, his voice rising enough that nearly everyone in first class was now openly staring. From 2 rows back, Richard Holloway stood up. What's the delay here? I've made it very clear that I need to be seated in 2A for this flight. I've been a Diamond Elite member for 20 years. He glared at Zara with unconcealed contempt. This child clearly doesn't understand how these things work. Bradley turned to Holloway with immediate difference. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Holloway. We're resolving the situation now. You're not resolving anything. Zara stated firmly, though her hands had begun to tremble slightly. I have a legitimate ticket for this seat. Look, Bradley said, all pretense of politeness gone. You can move voluntarily to economy, or we can have you removed from the flight entirely. Your choice. From across the aisle, a young Asian woman had begun openly recording the confrontation on her phone. Excuse me, she called to Bradley. Are you asking her to move because another passenger wants her seat, or is there actually a system error? Bradley shot her a warning look. This doesn't concern you, ma'am. I think it concerns all of us. When a paying passenger is being harassed, the woman replied calmly, continuing to record. I'm not moving, Zara stated, though her voice betrayed a slight quaver. Unless you can show me documentation of this supposed system error. Bradley's face flushed with anger. Fine. If that's your attitude, we'll have the police meet the aircraft. Would you prefer to move seats or be escorted off in handcuffs for disrupting a flight? The threat of police involvement sent a chill through Zara's body. As a black teenager, she was acutely aware of how quickly police encounters could escalate regardless of who was in the right. Tears welled in her eyes despite her best efforts to remain composed. This is blatant discrimination, she said, her voice breaking slightly. You have no valid reason to move me except to give my seat to a white passenger you deem more important. Don't pull the race card, Holloway interjected loudly. This is about status, not skin color. I've earned my place in this cabin. The cabin grew uncomfortably quiet. Passengers divided between embarrassed downward gazes and open stares. With shaking hands, Zara reached for her phone and dialed her father. She put the call on speaker, partly for witnesses and partly because her hands were trembling too badly to hold the phone to her ear. Dad, she said when Marcus answered, fighting to keep her voice from breaking. I need your help. They're trying to make me give up my seat for a white passenger and threatening to call the police if I don't. Have you ever been in a situation where you were made to feel like you didn't belong somewhere? You had every right to be type 1 in the comments if you've experienced discrimination in a public space. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment, regardless of their race or age. And subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage in the face of injustice. The silence that followed Zara's call to her father was thick enough to cut with a knife, but what happened next would turn this routine flight into a national headline. Would the airline crew realize their mistake before it was too late? Or would Zara become another victim of a system that all too often sees black faces as less deserving of dignity and respect? Keep watching to see how one phone call changed everything. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted only seconds, but to Zara, it felt eternal. Then Marcus Johnson's voice filled the cabin, calm, yet resonating with authority that made Bradley's shoulders stiffen. Zara, I need you to stay calm and keep this call on speaker. Who exactly is demanding you give up your seat? Bradley reached for the phone. Sir, this is a private matter that needs to be handled. This is Marcus Johnson, Chief Legal Officer of Skyline Airways. Marcus interrupted his voice, cutting through the cabin like a blade. And you are... The colour drained from Bradley's face as murmurs rippled through the first-class cabin. Bradley Carter, head flight attendant for Flight 1287. Sir Mr. Carter. Marcus continued, his voice dangerously composed. Perhaps you could explain why my daughter is being asked to surrender a seat for which I personally purchased a ticket. There's been a system error, sir. Bradley stammered, adopting a completely different tone than he'd used with Zara. We're simply trying to accommodate all our premium passengers. A system error, Marcus repeated skeptically. Interesting. And this error specifically affects my daughter's seat and no others. Could you please explain the technical nature of this error? I'm not privy to the exact details, Bradley fumbled, glancing nervously at his colleagues. I was instructed to reseat her by the lead purser. I see, Marcus replied. And who made the decision that my daughter should be moved to economy rather than any other first-class passenger? Was it perhaps related to the fact that she's the only black person in the cabin? Bradley's face flushed. Sir, I assure you this has nothing to do with race. Mr. Holloway is a Diamond Elite member who specifically requested, I don't care if Mr. Holloway is the Queen of England, Marcus cut in sharply. My daughter has a confirmed reservation for that seat. Unless Skyline Airways has changed its policy to allow racial discrimination in seating assignments without informing its chief legal officer, I suggest you find another solution immediately. The transformation in the crew's demeanor was instantaneous and dramatic. Bradley straightened his posture, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, Mr. Johnson, this has clearly been a misunderstanding. Miss Johnson is absolutely welcome to remain in her assigned seat. From his position in the aisle, Richard Holloway's face contorted with indignation. This is outrageous. I've been a loyal customer for decades. I specifically requested a forward-facing seat due to my motion sickness, and I was assured it would be arranged. Bradley turned to him with placating gestures. Mr. Holloway, please allow me to offer you an upgrade to our premium suite section. It's actually our finest accommodation with additional legroom and a fully reclining seat. That's beside the point. Holloway sputtered, though his objections were noticeably less forceful than before. This is about principle. I was promised specific arrangements. Sir, I deeply apologize for the confusion, Bradley said, guiding Holloway toward the premium section at the front of the cabin. We value your loyalty enormously and want to ensure your complete comfort. On the phone, Marcus spoke again. Zara, are you all right? I'm okay, Dad. She replied, her voice steadier now that the immediate threat had passed. I want the names of every crew member involved in this incident, Marcus continued. And I'll be speaking with Thomas personally when I land in Chicago. Yes, sir, Bradley called from where he was settling Holloway into his new seat. Again, our sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding. We'll make sure Miss Johnson receives our highest level of service for the remainder of the flight. After assuring her father she was safe, Zara ended the call, aware of the stares from other passengers. Some looked sympathetic, others uncomfortable, and a few seemed almost disappointed by the resolution, as if they'd been deprived of anticipated drama. The Asian woman who had been recording approached from across the aisle. Hey, I'm Maya Chen, she said quietly. I got the whole thing on video if you need it. That was seriously messed up. Thank you, Zara replied, genuinely touched by the support. I'm Zara. They only backed down because of who your dad is, Maya observed. That's not right. It shouldn't take a parent in corporate leadership for a black girl to keep the seat she paid for. Zara nodded, the truth of this statement hitting hard. Happens more often than people think, just usually without the happy ending. When the flight attendants returned to begin meal service, their attentiveness to Zara was almost comical in its overcorrection. Melissa, who had earlier ignored her requests, now hovered constantly, offering extra beverages, special snacks, and awesome apologies disguised as customer service. Is there anything else I can get for you, Miss Johnson? She asked for the third time in 20 minutes. Perhaps another pillow or a different magazine? I'm fine, thank you. Zara replied, increasingly uncomfortable with the attention that only highlighted how differently she'd been treated before. As the meal service concluded, Zara noticed Bradley and another flight attendant huddled near the galley, speaking in hushed voices while occasionally glancing in her direction. Though their words were inaudible, their body language suggested damage control rather than genuine remorse. Richard Holloway, meanwhile, had been making a series of phone calls from his new seat, his voice too low to hear, but his expression darkening with each conversation. When he caught Zara looking his way, his glare held such naked hostility that she quickly averted her eyes, a chill running down her spine despite the seeming resolution of the conflict. Trying to focus on her book, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something else was happening beneath the surface of the crew's newly solicitous behavior. This suspicion was confirmed when, during a trip to the restroom, she overheard Bradley speaking quietly to another crew member around the corner. "Wilson's office is already aware," he was saying. "They're preparing a statement about our commitment to equal treatment while emphasizing our loyalty program benefits. Social media team is on standby in case this goes public." "What about the girl's father?" the other attendant asked. "He's pretty high up, isn't he?" "Thomas is handling that personally," Bradley replied. "Apparently Johnson's been a problem before, always pushing his diversity agenda. This might be the leverage they need to finally push him out. Should we be documenting her behavior? Looking for anything problematic?" "Already on it," Bradley confirmed. "Keep phones ready. If she does anything that could be construed as disruptive, we need evidence to counter her narrative." Sarah slipped back to her seat, her heart pounding. What had seemed like a resolved situation was apparently just beginning. The airline wasn't apologizing. They were strategizing. And somehow, her father's position, the very thing that had protected her, might now be in jeopardy because of this incident. For the remainder of the flight, Zara noticed flight attendants casually pointing their phones in her direction whenever she spoke or moved. They were building a case, gathering ammunition for a battle she hadn't realized was still ongoing. The realization transformed her relief into dread. This wasn't over. It was evolving into something potentially much worse. 30 minutes before landing, Zara's phone began vibrating with a barrage of notifications. At first, she assumed it was friends responding to her earlier messages, but as she unlocked the screen, her stomach dropped. Dozens of mentions on Twitter, Instagram, comments from strangers, and text messages from concerned friends asking if she was okay. With trembling fingers, she opened Twitter to find Burke and Privileged Princess trending alongside a video clip that made her blood run cold. There she was, filmed from an angle that made her appear confrontational. Her words carefully edited to remove context. The captions read, "Intented teen uses daddy's position to demand special treatment and kick paying customer from his seat." The airline's official account had posted a vague statement. "Skyline Airways is committed to treating all passengers with respect while honoring our loyalty program commitments. We are investigating an incident on Flight 1287 and will provide updates as appropriate." But the real damage was happening in the comments and shares. Users she'd never met were dissecting her appearance, calling her another spoiled affirmative action case, and what happens when diversity hires raise entitled children. Some had already found her Instagram account posting her school information and previous photos. "Your daddy can't protect you from the internet." One comment read, followed by a thread speculating about her academic achievements and whether she'd truly earned her place at Columbia. A wave of nausea washed over Zara as she scrolled through. Hundreds of hateful messages, many using coded language to mask their racial animus, while others were explicitly racist. These weren't just random trolls. The sheer volume and coordination suggested something more deliberate. "Are you seeing this?" Maya texted from across the aisle, her expression grim. "They're twisting everything." Before Zara could respond, Maya sent another message with a link. "I've posted my unedited video showing what really happened. Twitter's already flagging it as disputed content, but it's getting shares." Indeed, Maya's video told a completely different story, showing Bradley's aggressive tone, Holloway's entitled demands, and Zara's reasonable responses. The contrast was stark, but the airline's version had a significant head start and the advantage of their corporate social media team's amplification. As Zara watched, a new notification appeared, a direct message from an unfamiliar account. "We know about your father's discrimination lawsuit against Transglobal Finance last year. Wonder what would happen if those details leaked. Back off or find out." The threat sent a chill through her body. Her father had indeed represented an employee in a racial discrimination case against a major financial institution, but the details had been confidential as part of the settlement agreement. How would anyone know about that unless they had insider corporate information? Another notification lit up her screen, an alert from her banking app. Someone had attempted to access her college savings account. The attempt had been blocked by security protocols, but the invasion felt violating in a way that transcended digital boundaries. "Dad, they're coming after me online." She texted Marcus, "Someone just tried to hack my bank account. This is bigger than just the flight crew. Lock down all your accounts now." He replied immediately, "Don't respond to anything. I'm calling our security team." Following her father's instructions, Zara changed passwords and enabled two-factor authentication on every account she could think of. But the digital assault continued unabated as more edited clips appeared, each crafted to make her look increasingly unreasonable and entitled. A news alert caught her attention. Skyline Airways Investor Relations Director Richard Holloway issues statement on in-flight incident. The pieces suddenly connected with devastating clarity. Holloway wasn't just a random entitled passenger. He was a high-ranking executive at a rival airline with significant Skyline investments. The statement was carefully worded but unmistakably threatening. "As a significant investor in Skyline Airways, I have serious concerns about the company's leadership culture that allows employees' family members to abuse premium seating policies. This incident raises questions about governance and nepotism that shareholders should examine carefully." Maya leaned across the aisle, showing Zara her phone. "Look at what I found on Holloway. He's not just an investor in Skyline. He's on the board of directors for Blackstar Airlines, Skyline's biggest competitor. They've been trying to acquire Skyline for years." The realization hit Zara like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a seat on an airplane or even about racial bias, though. That had been the match that lit the fuse. This was corporate warfare, and she had unwittingly become a pawn in a much larger game. "There's more," Maya whispered, scrolling through her phone. "Look at these coordinated tweets from apparent customers, all using the same talking points about your father's diversity agenda harming Skyline's bottom line. These aren't random comments. This is a professional PR hit job." As the aircraft began its descent into JFK, Zara felt a mounting sense of dread. What had begun as yet another demoralizing experience with racial profiling had morphed into something far more dangerous. A calculated attack on her family that was rapidly spiraling beyond her control. The seatbelt sign illuminated as they approached New York. But Zara's real journey, one that would test her resilience in ways she'd never imagined, was only just beginning. Her dream trip to Columbia's pre-law program now seemed trivial compared to the battle that awaited her beyond the arrival gate. As Flight 1287 touched down at JFK Airport, Zara peered through the window and felt her heart sink. The jetway wasn't just occupied by the usual ground crew. Television vans with satellite dishes and reporters clutching microphones lined the way-eye perimeter of the arrival area. Somehow, in the span of a 3-hour flight, her humiliating experience had transformed into a media spectacle. "This can't be happening," she whispered, turning to Maya, who looked equally alarmed. "How did they even know which flight to meet?" Maya wondered aloud. "Someone must have tipped them off." Bradley's voice came over the intercom, suspiciously professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to John F. Kennedy International Airport. Local time is 2:45 p.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 78 degrees. For your safety and convenience, please remain seated with seat belts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop and the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign." He paused before adding, "We've been informed there may be media representatives at the gate. Skyline Airways respects the privacy of all our passengers and will have security personnel available to assist anyone requiring an escort through the terminal. The false concern in his voice was palpable to Zara, who now understood this was no coincidence but a carefully orchestrated public relations battle. As passengers began retrieving their belongings, Bradley approached her seat, leaning down to speak in a voice only she could hear. "Security will meet you at the door," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "For your protection, of course." The implicit threat wasn't lost on Zara. This protection would also serve to isolate her from potential witnesses or supporters as she navigated the media gauntlet. Her phone vibrated with a text from her father. "Security team, waiting at gate. Do not speak to press. Corporate communications trying to control narrative. CEO Thomas Wilson issued statement questioning your account. Will call when safe." The betrayal stung almost as much as the discrimination itself. Thomas Wilson had been a dinner guest in their home, had spoken at her high school career day, at Marcus's invitation, had publicly championed diversity while privately benefiting from her father's legal expertise. Now, he was turning against them when it became politically expedient. As the aircraft door opened, two men in dark suits and earpieces appeared in the jetway. "Miss Johnson, we're here to escort you safely through the terminal," the taller one said, his expression professionally neutral. "I'd like my friend to come with me," Zara said, gesturing to Maya. "She has video evidence of what actually happened." The security personnel exchanged glances before the second man nodded. "That's fine, but we need to move quickly." As they stepped into the terminal, the chaos was immediate. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions that blended into an incomprehensible wall of noise. "Zara, did you demand special treatment because of your father's position? Is it true you threatened the crew when they asked you to follow Standard D protocol? Do you feel your social media complaints were appropriate before the airline could investigate? What's your response to accusations of playing the race card for preferential seating?" The security team formed a human shield, guiding Zara and Maya through the crowd toward a service elevator. Behind them, Bradley Carter and the other flight attendants were already giving impromptu interviews, their expressions solemn as they described their professional handling of a difficult situation. Once inside the elevator, Zara finally allowed herself to exhale. How did this get so out of control so quickly? The security guard checked his phone. "Your father arranged for a car at the service entrance. We'll get you there without further exposure to the press." "You work for Skyline?" Maya asked suspiciously. "We're private contractors hired directly by Mr. Johnson," the man clarified. "We don't report to airline management as they navigated through back corridors of the airport." Zara's phone rang with her father's incoming call. "Dad, it's a complete nightmare here," she began, but Marcus cut her off. Zara listened carefully. "Thomas Wilson just issued a public statement questioning your version of events. He's claiming you became confrontational when asked to comply with standard seating policies and that the crew demonstrated exemplary professionalism in a challenging situation." "That's a lie," Zara protested, her voice rising with indignation. "They threatened to have me arrested for sitting in my assigned seat." "I know, baby girl. I believe you," Marcus assured her. But Wilson's gone further. He's called an emergency board meeting to discuss the inappropriate leveraging of employee relationships to circumvent company policies. He's coming after my job. The elevator doors opened to reveal a loading dock where a black SUV waited with tinted windows. "We need to get you somewhere safe while we figure this out," Marcus continued. "I've got a legal team assembling at the Grand Hyatt. They'll meet you there in an hour." As Zara and Maya were ushered into the vehicle, another notification lit Zara's phone. An email from Columbia University Summer Program Director regarding your participation in light of recent events. Her hand trembled as she opened it. "Dear Ms. Johnson, it has come to our attention that you are currently involved in a public controversy that may distract from the collegiate atmosphere we strive to maintain. While we are not passing judgment on the specifics of the situation, we believe it prudent to place your admission status under review pending further clarification." Tears welled in Zara's eyes as the reality sank in. In the span of a single day, a simple flight to attend her dream program had cascaded into a nightmare threatening her father's career, her educational opportunities, and their family's reputation. all because she had refused to surrender a seat that was rightfully hers to a white man who felt entitled to it. The SUV pulled away from the terminal, but through the tinted windows, Zara could still see the media circus growing as airline executives arrived to give their version of events. On the vehicle's built-in screen, a news channel was already running the story with the chyron. Privilege or prejudice, airline seating controversy raises questions about race and status. They're turning this completely around, Maya said incredulously, watching the coverage, making it seem like you're the entitled one when you literally just wanted to keep the seat you paid for. Zara's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Board meeting in progress, votes being yo-counted. Your father's position looking precarious. This could all go away if he would simply issue an apology and acknowledge a misunderstanding. The message was clear. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was an orchestrated power play, using racial bias as leverage to achieve corporate goals that had likely been in motion long before Zara ever boarded that plane. As the SUV navigated through Manhattan traffic toward the hotel, Zara made a decision. If corporate America thought they could use a 17-year-old black girl as a pawn in their power games, they were about to learn a painful lesson about underestimating the wrong family. Have you ever witnessed someone in power trying to silence the truth to protect their own interests? Type 1 in the comments if you've seen powerful people or companies twist facts to avoid accountability. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. And don't forget to subscribe for the next part of this shocking story. When a teenager's simple plane ride becomes a corporate conspiracy, who will prevail? Will Zara's father lose everything for defending his daughter? Or will they find a way to expose the truth behind Skyline Airways' discriminatory practices? And just how deep does this corruption go? The answers may shock you. The suite at the Grand Hyatt had been transformed into an impromptu war room by the time Marcus Johnson arrived. Laptops, legal pads, and coffee cups covered every available surface as his legal team worked phones and drafted documents. Zara sat in an armchair by the window. Maya, beside her, both teenagers, looking shell-shocked by the day's rapid escalation. "Dad!" Zara jumped up as Marcus entered, rushing into his embrace. Despite the crisis swirling around them, Marcus took a moment to hold his daughter tightly, reminding himself what truly mattered in this fight. "Are you okay?" he asked, examining her face with paternal concern. "I'm fine," Zara assured him, though her reined eyes suggested otherwise. "But what about you?" "Your job. Let me worry about that," Marcus said firmly. "Right now, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." He turned to Maya with an extended hand. "You must be Maya. Thank you for standing by my daughter when others wouldn't." "Anyone would have done the same," Maya replied, though they all knew that wasn't true. Marcus addressed the room of attorneys and paralegals. "We need to shift from defense to offense. This isn't just about one incident anymore. This is a coordinated attack using my daughter as leverage. I want to know who's behind it, why, and how deep it goes." A senior attorney named Elaine stepped forward. "We've started analyzing the social media patterns. The attacks against Zara show signs of professional astroturfing. Multiple accounts created recently. Similar linguistic patterns. Coordinated timing of posts. This isn't random internet outrage, it's a calculated campaign." "What about Holloway's connection to Blackar Airlines?" Zara asked. Marcus nodded appreciatively at his daughter's insight. "Good thinking. He's not just an investor. He's their director of acquisitions. Blackstar has been trying to buy Skyline for years, but I've been advising the board against the merger because of their documented history of labor violations. So this could be about removing you as an obstacle to their corporate takeover," Maya suggested. "Possibly," Marcus agreed, "but I suspect there's more. The specific targeting of Zara through racial dynamics feels personal, not just tactical." Another attorney spoke up. "We should see if there's a pattern of similar incidents. If they did this to Zara, they've likely done it to others." Zara straightened in her chair. "We could use social media to find out. If I share my experience, maybe others will come forward with similar stories." Marcus hesitated. That puts you even more in the public eye, which brings additional risks. Dad, they're already attacking me online. At least this way, we control the narrative, Zara argued. And if we find others who've experienced the same treatment, it strengthens our case and makes it harder for them to dismiss this as an isolated incident. After consideration, Marcus nodded. All right, but we craft the message carefully. No accusations, we can't prove, just your first-hand experience and an invitation for others to share theirs. Within an hour, Zara had posted a straightforward account of her experience accompanied by Maya's unedited video. The post ended with, "If you've experienced similar treatment on Skyline Airways or any airline, please share your story. You're not alone." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of messages poured in from minority passengers who had been bumped from flights, had their first-class tickets questioned, or been subjected to extra security scrutiny without cause. Many had documented their experiences but felt powerless against the corporate machine. There's definitely a pattern, Elaine confirmed as they sorted through the responses. But we need hard evidence from inside the company to prove these aren't isolated incidents. Marcus checked his watch. I need to make some calls to friendly board members. They should know what they're voting on isn't just about me. It's about systematic discrimination that could result in a class action lawsuit. As Marcus stepped into the bedroom to make his calls, Zara's phone lit up with a message request from an unfamiliar account. I have information about Skyline seating policies. Former flight attendant fired for objecting. Can provide documentation. The message was from Jessica Moore, who had worked for Skyline for 8 years before being terminated 6 months ago for insubordination. A quick social media search confirmed her employment history. Should we trust her? Maya asked as they debated responding. Let's be cautious but open. Zara decided arranging a video call with Jessica through a secure platform recommended by the legal team. Jessica appeared on screen minutes later. A woman in her early 30s with tired eyes and nervous energy. Thank you for speaking with me, she began. I've been trying to get someone to listen about what's happening at Eyes Skyline for months, but they're very good at silencing people. What exactly is happening? Zara asked. Jessica took a deep breath. About a year ago, they implemented what they called customer value optimization protocols. On paper, it was about maximizing revenue by prioritizing high-value customers. In practice, it was a thinly veiled system for ensuring white passengers got preferential treatment. Do you have proof? Elaine asked, joining the conversation. Jessica nodded. Training materials, internal memos, emails from management. They used coded language like traditional demographic and heritage customers to refer to older white passengers. Flight attendants were instructed to use discretion in enforcing seating policies with passenger appearance as a factor in determining who belongs in premium cabins. Why did they fire you? Zara inquired. I started documenting incidents and filed an internal complaint. A week later, I was terminated for creating a hostile work environment. The severance agreement included an NDA, which I signed because I needed the money, but seeing what happened to you, it's exactly what I was trying to prevent. Jessica explained that she had kept copies of key documents despite the NDA. I knew this wasn't right. I just didn't know what to do with the information until now. As Jessica shared her screen to show them the documents, the pattern became undeniable. Skyline had systematically developed protocols that appeared race-neutral on paper, but an application created a clear hierarchy with minority passengers at the bottom. One particularly damning email from Thomas Wilson himself read, "The reality is that our highest-spending customers have certain expectations about their flying environment. While we must maintain the appearance of equal treatment, our priority must always be protecting the comfort and preferences of our premium revenue generators." Marcus returned from making his calls, his expression grave. The board meeting didn't go well. They voted to place me on administrative leave pending an investigation into abuse of position. Thomas is claiming this is about corporate governance, not race. Dad, you need to see this, Zara said, gesturing to the documents. Jessica had provided. This goes way beyond one incident. It's company policy. As Marcus reviewed the evidence, his legal training took over. This changes everything. They're not just responding poorly to an isolated incident. They're actively covering up systematic discrimination that comes directly from the top. Jessica explained that the policy extended beyond Skyline. There's an industry working group that shares these practices. Blackar's program is even more explicit. They actually rank passengers using an algorithm that factors in zip codes and names that suggest cultural background. That's why Holloway was so confident. Maya realized he wasn't just a random entitled passenger. He was enforcing what he sees as industry standard practice. Marcus was already typing notes on his laptop. We need to move quickly before they destroy evidence. I'll contact the Department of Transportation for an emergency injunction to preserve records. As the legal team sprang into action with renewed purpose, Zara felt a shift in the energy of the room. What had begun as a personal fight for dignity had uncovered a much larger system of injustice, one that affected countless passengers who lacked the connections and resources the Johnsons had. Jessica, Zara said quietly, "Thank you for coming forward. I know it wasn't easy." "It was actually you who gave me the courage," Jessica replied. "Watching that video of you refusing to move, standing your ground, despite everything they threw at you. You reminded me why I became a flight attendant in the first place, to help people, not to rank them by their value to a corporation." As night fell over Manhattan, the suite continued to buzz with activity as more evidence poured in from former employees, passengers, and even current Skyline staff who'd been troubled by the policies but feared retaliation. The story was growing beyond what any corporate PR team could contain, revealing a truth that had been hiding in plain sight for anyone who had ever felt unwelcome in spaces they had every right to occupy. For Zara, the revelation brought both validation and sadness. Her experience wasn't an anomaly or bad luck. It was the predictable outcome of deliberate policies designed to maintain spaces of privilege. But in that painful truth lay an opportunity to challenge not just one incident, but an entire system that had gone unchecked for too long. Skyline Airways' response came swiftly and with overwhelming force. By morning, the corporate machinery had fully mobilized against the Johnson family with a sophistication that confirmed they had contingency plans ready long before Zara ever boarded her flight. Marcus's company email was deactivated overnight. His keycard access was revoked. Security guards were posted at his office to prevent him from retrieving personal items, the corporate apartment they maintained in Chicago for his frequent work. Visits had been entered and his belongings packed awaiting courier delivery. These standard corporate separation protocols were just the beginning. What followed was anything but standard. Zara woke to find her name trending again, but this time with hashtags like "Want Privilege Exposed" and "Truth About Zara." A series of carefully constructed stories had appeared overnight, questioning her academic achievements. An anonymous former teacher claimed she had received preferential treatment throughout her education due to her father's donations and influence. Her acceptance to Columbia was framed as a diversity initiative rather than merit-based, with unnamed sources familiar with the admissions process suggesting her scores had been below the typical threshold. Photos from her Instagram had been selectively curated to portray an image of excessive privilege and entitlement. The spring break trip to Barbados, the designer prom dress, the new car for her 16th birthday. Each element of her life was recontextualized to support a narrative of unearned privilege, carefully sidestepping direct mentions of race while using coded language and imagery that activated racial biases in the audience. "This is insane," Maya said as they scrolled through the barrage of attacks over breakfast in the hotel suite. "They're trying to make you look like some spoiled rich kid who's never faced any real challenges." "It's a classic misdirection strategy," Elaine explained, joining them with fresh coffee. "They're shifting the conversation from discrimination to privilege, using Zara's relative economic advantages to undermine her experience of racial bias. It's particularly effective because it divides potential allies along class lines." Marcus faced his own barrage of attacks. Financial blogs suddenly featured stories questioning his legal judgment in past cases. Anonymous sources alleged he had leveraged his position to secure favorable contracts for friends. A particularly damaging piece suggested he had mishandled a sexual harassment claim within the company. An absolute fabrication, but crafted with just enough plausible details to raise doubts. They're not just attacking our public image, Marcus observed, grimly. Look at this. He showed them a letter from the pre-law program at Columbia, informing Zara that her acceptance was under review due to concerns about potential disruptions to the academic environment given the ongoing public controversy. They can't do that, Maya protested. You were admitted on merit. They can cite character and fitness concerns, Marcus explained. It's a subjective standard that gives them wide latitude. The attacks continued to escalate throughout the day. Jessica Moore received a cease and desist letter threatening legal action for violating her NDA. Other witnesses who had come forward found themselves facing similar intimidation tactics. By afternoon, Marcus received notification that his company stock options had been frozen pending investigation into potential breaches of fiduciary duty, with much of his compensation tied to equity. This represented a significant financial blow at a time when legal expenses were mounting. They're trying to break us financially, he admitted to Zara during a rare quiet moment. This kind of legal battle could cost millions, and they know it. So we just give up? Zara asked, fear and anger wearing in her expression. Marcus shook his head firmly. Never, but we need to be strategic. This isn't just about money. They're isolating us, trying to turn public opinion against us, making us look like troublemakers rather than victims. The isolation tactics were indeed effective. Former colleagues who had initially reached out with support were now conspicuously silent. Friends cancelled plans with vague excuses. Even family members called with concerns about the wisdom of taking on such a powerful adversary. Maya's phone chimed with a news alert. Skyline Airways announces new diversity and inclusion initiative amid seating controversy. The press release detailed a comprehensive new program with scholarships, community partnerships, and enhanced staff training, all presented as evidence of the company's commitment to equality with no acknowledgement of the discrimination allegations. Classic deflection. Elaine commented, "They're positioning themselves as champions of diversity while actively working to discredit the people calling out their discriminatory practices." As the day progressed, the attacks grew more personal. Someone leaked Marcus's driving record, highlighting a speeding ticket from 3 years ago. Conservative commentators began questioning how a supposedly oppressed family could afford their lifestyle, conveniently ignoring Marcus's 20-year career of academic excellence followed by corporate achievement. Zara's social media accounts were flooded with hateful messages, many containing thinly veiled racial slurs or explicit threats. The hotel received a bomb threat, forcing a temporary evacuation and relocation to another property under different names. By evening, Marcus looked exhausted as he joined Zara and the legal team for a strategy session. "They've offered a settlement," he announced, without preamble. "How much?" Elaine asked. $2 million confidential terms, mutual non-disparagement, Marcus replied, and guaranteed admission for Zara to any Ivy League school of her choice. Through their alumni connections, the room fell silent as the implications sank in. It was a substantial offer, enough to secure their financial future regardless of employment outcomes, enough to make the immediate problems go away. "What's the catch?" Maya asked, breaking the silence. Complete silence about the discrimination, permanent non-disclosure agreements for everyone involved, including Jessica and the other witnesses, withdrawal of all complaints and destruction of evidence, and an agreed-upon public statement that the whole incident was a misunderstanding with no racial component. Zara looked at her father, studying the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the strain showing in his usually confident posture. In 24 hours, they had gone from a position of relative security to fighting for their reputation, financial stability, and future. The pressure was immense and deliberately designed to break their resolve. "What do you think we should do?" she asked quietly. Marcus met his daughter's gaze. "Honestly, I'm torn. They're offering security, but at the cost of truth. They're betting that our personal comfort means more to us than the principle at stake." He paused. But this isn't just my decision. This affects your future too. They're trying to buy our silence, Zara said slowly. And if we take it, what happens to the next black passenger who doesn't have a father in the Sea White? What happens to Jessica, who risked everything to come forward? What message does it send about what kind of behavior we're willing to tolerate as long as the price is right? Pride filled Marcus's eyes as he listened to his daughter's moral clarity cutting through the complexity of their situation. You're right, but I need you to understand what we're facing if we continue. This gets harder, not easier. The attacks will intensify. There are no guarantees we'll win. Zara squared her shoulders, a gesture so reminiscent of her father that several team members exchanged knowing glances. I didn't ask for this fight, she said firmly. But since they brought it to us, I'm not backing down. Not for money, not for convenience, not for anything. As the legal team began outlining their next steps, Maya's phone buzzed with another notification. Guys, she interrupted, her voice tight with concern. You need to see this. She held up her screen to display a breaking news headline. Skyline Airways CEO Thomas Wilson. No evidence of racial bias in Johnson incident. Board considers legal action against false claims. The corporate counterattack was escalating, and the Johnson family now stood at a crossroads with their principles on one side and their peace on the other. The decision they made would determine not just their personal future, but potentially the experience of countless travelers who would never know their names. 3 days after the incident, Zara sat alone in the hotel suite, scrolling through the seemingly endless barrage of online attacks. The legal team had established a temporary office in an adjoining room, their voices a constant murmur through the wall as they worked to counter Skyline's aggressive tactics. Marcus had left hours earlier for emergency meetings with potential allies, looking more worn with each passing day. The isolation was becoming unbearable. Former friends had distanced themselves, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Columbia's pre-law program had officially deferred her acceptance pending resolution of current circumstances. Even her high school had released a carefully worded statement supporting all our students while conspicuously avoiding any specific defense of Zara. A knock at the door startled her. Security protocols meant no one should be able to reach their floor without clearance. Cautiously, she approached the peephole to find a young woman in a Skyline Airways uniform, shifting nervously in the hallway. Miss Johnson, the woman called softly. My name is Aisha Reynolds. I'm a flight attendant with Skyline. I need to speak with you about what happened. Zara cracked the door chain, still engaged. How did you find me? That's not important. Right now, Aisha replied, glancing over her shoulder. What's important is that I have information proof that what happened to you wasn't an isolated incident. It's systematic, and I'm not the only one who wants to come forward. After a careful security check, Aisha was allowed inside. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket with hands that trembled slightly. This contains internal training materials, emails between management about passenger prioritization protocols, and documentation of similar incidents that were covered up. I've been collecting evidence for months, but never knew what to do with it until I saw your story. Why are you risking your job? Zara asked. Aisha's expression hardened because last year my grandmother was bumped from first class on a Skyline flight she'd saved for years to purchase as a retirement gift to herself. They gave the same excuses system error loyalty program priorities. I watched her dignity stripped away by the same policies I was being trained to enforce. I can't be part of this system anymore. Within hours, Aisha's flash drive proved to be just the beginning, like breaking through a dam. Her actions seemed to release a flood of support from unexpected quarters. 4 more Skyline employees reached out anonymously, providing additional documentation. A group of passengers from various flights over the past year formed an online coalition sharing strikingly similar stories of discrimination. Maya, who had been coordinating social media responses, burst into the suite with news. You've got to see this. Someone just posted unedited security footage from the flight showing exactly what happened. It completely contradicts the airline's version. The footage apparently leaked by a sympathetic airport employee showed the confrontation from an angle that captured Bradley's aggressive stance and Holloway's entitled demands. More importantly, it included clear audio of Bradley stating that some passengers are more valuable to the airline than others, a smoking gun that directly matched language in the discriminatory training materials. Marcus returned to the hotel with Aleliana Washington, a prominent civil rights attorney who had offered to represent them pro bono after seeing the mounting evidence. This just became much bigger than one incident, she explained. We're looking at a class action with potential implications across the entire industry. As they strategized late into the night, another unexpected ally emerged. Devon Carter, an investigative journalist with a major news outlet, requested a meeting. Initially skeptical, Marcus agreed only after thorough background checking confirmed Devon's reputation for integrity. I've been investigating airline discrimination for months, Devon explained when they met the following morning. Your daughter's case broke the silence that's been protecting these practices. I have sources across 3 major airlines confirming similar policies, but no one would go on record until now. Devon brought not just his journalistic expertise, but connections to technical specialists who could authenticate the growing mountain of evidence and protect it from digital tampering or deletion. They're going to claim these documents are fake or taken out of context, he warned. We need unimpeachable verification. As word spread through secure channels, the coalition of supporters continued to grow. Civil rights organizations offered resources and public support. Legal advocacy groups filed amicus briefs. Tech experts volunteered to help secure their communications against potential surveillance or hacking. The most surprising ally came in the form of a heavily encrypted email from someone identifying only as Conscience. The message was brief. Former Skyline executive witnessed Wilson and Holloway discussing passenger demographic optimization strategies 2 years ago. Can provide board meeting minutes and strategic planning documents. What happened to your daughter was not an accident. It was policy. After careful verification, Protocol's Conscience was revealed as Rebecca Lawson, former Senior Vice President of Customer Experience, who had left Skyline 18 months earlier with a generous severance package and ironclad NDA. She had been troubled by the direction of the company, but felt powerless to change it from within. Thomas and Richard have been working together for years, Rebecca explained during a secure video call. It wasn't just about racial bias, though. That was certainly part of it. It was about creating an exclusive product for a very specific demographic while maintaining plausible deniability. The documents she provided revealed a deliberate strategy referred to internally as environmental comfort optimization, corporate speak, for ensuring that high-paying white passengers wouldn't have to share premium cabins with passengers they might find culturally different. The algorithm was designed to look race-neutral on paper, Rebecca explained. It used proxies like zip codes, name analysis, and purchasing patterns, but the intent was clear in how they measured success. They tracked demographic harmony metrics in premium cabins, celebrating when they achieved what they called customer expectation alignment. Maya, who had been monitoring social media trends throughout the crisis, reported a significant shift in public sentiment. The hashtag #NruthForZara is outperforming their corporate messaging by 3-1. People are sharing their own experiences and celebrities are starting to amplify the message. As their support network grew, the landscape of the battle began to change. What Skyline had initially dismissed as an isolated complaint from a privileged teenager had morphed into a movement with thousands of voices, substantial evidence, and growing public support. For the first time since the ordeal began, Zara allowed herself to feel something close to hope. The transformation wasn't just in public perception or legal positioning. Something was changing within Zara herself. The shy, academically focused teenager who had boarded that flight was evolving into someone stronger, more determined, and increasingly aware of her potential to affect change beyond her personal circumstances. It's not just about my seat anymore, she reflected during a quiet moment with her father. It's about every person who's ever been made to feel they don't belong in a space they have every right to occupy. Marcus nodded, a complex mix of pride and concern in his expression. This is how meaningful change often starts. Not from grand plans, but from individuals who simply refuse to accept injustice when it happens to them. As their legal team prepared to file a comprehensive class action lawsuit against Skyline Airways, Rebecca provided one final piece of explosive information. Documentation proving that CEO Thomas Wilson had personally reviewed and approved the oath discriminatory seating policies, along with evidence that Holloway and Wilson had been conspiring for years to implement similar practices across multiple airlines. The revelation transformed what might have been dismissed as middle management overreach into a scandal reaching the highest levels of corporate leadership. For the first time since the crisis began, the balance of power had shifted perceptibly in their favor. Have you ever witnessed the power that comes when people unite against injustice? Type 1 in the comments if you believe in the strength of collective action against discrimination. Hit that like button if you're inspired by those who risk their careers to stand up for what's right. And make sure to subscribe to follow this incredible journey of courage and transformation. What happens when corporate giants realize they've underestimated the power of the very people they've marginalized? Will Zara and her growing coalition succeed in exposing the truth? Or will Skyline's enormous resources ultimately allow them to bury the scandal? The battle is about to reach its most critical phase, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The United States District Court for the Southern District of New York buzzed with anticipation as Aleliana Washington, flanked by Marcus and Zara Johnson, approached the podium for their preliminary hearing. News cameras clustered outside the historic courthouse, while inside the gallery overflowed with supporters, journalists, and curious onlookers. "Your Honor, Aleliana," began her voice resonating through the packed courtroom. "We come before you today, not merely on behalf of one young woman wrongfully humiliated, but representing thousands of passengers who have suffered under Skyline Airways. Discriminatory policies. The lawsuit they had filed was comprehensive. Racial discrimination under federal transportation laws, violation of civil rights statutes, breach of contract, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and corporate conspiracy. The damages sought were substantial, but more significantly, they demanded structural changes to airline seating policies and independent oversight of implementation. Skyline's legal team, a phalanx of high-priced attorneys from a prestigious firm, projected confidence as they dismissed the allegations as anecdotal complaints and misunderstandings of legitimate business practices. Their lead counsel, Harrison Bennett, presented a polished counterargument. "Your Honor, this case represents a fundamental mischaracterization of standard airline protocols. Skyline Airways has a documented history of diversity initiatives and inclusive policies. What we have here is an unfortunate incident being exploited for financial gain and media attention." As the arguments proceeded, Zara sat straight back beside her father, aware of the occasional glances from the judge. At 17, she was young to be at the center of such a high-profile case, but her composure belied her age. Each time the Eyesdeal defense attempted to paint her as entitled or naive, she met their gaze without flinching. Outside the courtroom, Skyline Airways had launched a massive public relations campaign. Full-page newspaper ads touted their commitment to equal treatment. Television spots featured diverse crews welcoming passengers aboard. Their website prominently displayed their newly established scholarship fund for minority students interested in aviation careers. Classic damage control, Devon Carter observed as they reviewed media coverage during a lunch recess. "They're trying to drown out the lawsuit with positive messaging while their lawyers fight to dismiss it." Jessica Moore's testimony proved pivotal in the initial hearing. Despite threats of countersuits for violating her NDA, she took the stand and methodically outlined the training she had received to enforce the customer value optimization policies. "We were instructed to use certain code phrases," she explained. "If a passenger didn't align with cabin expectations, that was our signal to find reasons to relocate them regardless of their ticketed seat assignment." "And what determined whether someone aligned with expectations?" Aleliana asked. "It was never explicitly stated in writing," Jessica replied. But in training sessions, the examples were clear. The passengers to be accommodated were almost exclusively older, affluent white travelers. Those to be relocated were predominantly people of color, regardless of their ticket status. Skyline's attorneys objected vigorously, arguing that Jessica's testimony constituted hearsay and speculation rather than evidence of formal policy. Judge Rosemary Chen, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for thorough analysis, allowed the testimony but noted the need for documentary corroboration. That corroboration arrived in the form of Rebecca Lawson, whose insider knowledge of executive discussions proved devastating to Skyline's defense. She produced meeting minutes where Thomas Wilson had explicitly discussed demographic harmony as a priority for premium cabins, along with internal metrics tracking the visual cohesion of first-class sections. Mr. Wilson stated, and I quote from my contemporaneous notes, "Our premium customers have certain expectations about their flying environment. While we must maintain the appearance of equal treatment, our operational priority must always be protecting the comfort level of our highest revenue generators." Rebecca testified the most damning evidence came from Richard Holloway himself, whose private emails with Wilson revealed an explicit strategy to minimize disruption factors in premium cabins by careful management of passenger demographics. One particularly problematic exchange discussed the implementation of an algorithm that would flag potentially disruptive passenger combinations for proactive receding intervention. As public outrage mounted, Skyline's stock price began to plummet. Shareholders demanded answers, and several board members privately expressed concerns about potential liability. A group of minority shareholders filed a derivative lawsuit against the board for failing to exercise appropriate oversight of discriminatory practices that now threatened the company's financial stability. Through it all, Zara found unexpected strength. The shy, academically focused teenager who had boarded that fateful flight was evolving into a poised young woman who understood the significance of the stand she was taking. Media requests for interviews poured in, but on Aleliana's advice, she declined them all, letting the legal process speak for itself. The turning point came when Judge Chen denied Skyline's motion to dismiss, ruling that the plaintiffs had presented sufficient evidence to proceed to discovery. Her written opinion was unsparing in its assessment. The documentation provided suggests not merely isolated incidents of poor judgment by individual employees, but rather the potential existence of systematic policies designed to discriminate based on race while maintaining plausible deniability. Such allegations, if proven, would constitute violations of multiple federal statutes governing equal access to public accommodations and transportation services. That evening, as the Johnson team celebrated this preliminary victory in their hotel suite, Marcus received a call from a former colleague still working at Skyline headquarters. "The board is split," the insider reported. "Half want to settle immediately before more evidence becomes public. The other half, led by Wilson, want to fight to the bitter end. And Holloway Marcus asked, he's gone dark. Hasn't been seen at Blackar offices in days. Rumor has it he's hired separate counsel from the company's legal team. There's speculation he might be preparing to cut a deal." As the legal proceedings moved forward, protests began appearing at major Skyline hubs. Passengers carried signs reading, "I belong in any seat I purchase," and "End airline apartheid." Social media campaigns urged travelers to request documentation of seating policies before booking. Several corporate clients announced they were reviewing their contracts with Skyline pending the outcome of the litigation. Thomas Wilson, once the confident face of the airline, made a critical miscalculation during a televised interview. When pressed about the allegations, his carefully crafted statement gave way to visible irritation. This entire case is being driven by opportunists looking to extract money from a successful company. He declared his tone dismissive. The Johnson girl and her father saw a chance to leverage a minor customer service issue into a payday, plain and simple. The backlash was immediate and fierce. By personalizing the attack on a teenage girl who had simply wanted to sit in her assigned seat, Wilson transformed himself from corporate defender to public villain. Overnight war, Wilson must go began trending across social media platforms. In the AI courthouse the following morning, Judge Chen announced her ruling on the plaintiff's motion for class certification, allowing the case to proceed as a class action representing all minority passengers who had experienced similar discrimination on Skyline flights within the past 5 years. This court finds sufficient commonality of experience and injury to justify class treatment, she stated. The evidence suggests a pattern of behavior that potentially affected thousands of passengers, making individual litigation impracticable and class resolution appropriate. For Skyline Airways, the ruling represented a seismic shift in the legal landscape. What had begun as one family's fight for dignity had evolved into a landmark case with implications for the entire industry and potential damages that could reach into hundreds of millions of dollars. As Marcus and Zara left the courthouse that afternoon, reporters shouted questions about settlement talks and next steps. Aleliana fielded these with professional restraint. But Zara caught her father's expression, a mixture of vindication and grim determination that told her this battle, while turning in their favor, was far from over. As the legal pressure on Skyline Airways intensified, the tactics employed against the Johnson family took a darker turn. What had begun as corporate damage control evolved into something more sinister, suggesting desperation from those who stood to lose the most if the truth were fully exposed. The first warning came in the form of an unmarked envelope slipped under their hotel room door. Inside was a print out of Zara's complete daily schedule. Classes she would have attended at Columbia, her planned dormitory assignment, even the route she typically jogged in the mornings at home in Chicago. Attached was a note with 5 words. "Is this worth your safety?" The hotel's security footage showed no clear image of who had delivered the envelope. The implied threat, however, was unmistakable. "We need to move you both immediately." The head of their security team insisted after reviewing the material. This level of surveillance suggests resources beyond typical corporate intelligence gathering. Within hours, they had relocated to Dorito, a private residence with enhanced security protocols. Marcus contacted the FBI, who agreed to investigate the threat, but warned that proving its connection to Skyline executives would be challenging. "They're using cutouts and third parties." The agent explained plausible deniability is built into their approach. The psychological impact was significant. Zara found herself constantly checking over her shoulder, startling at unexpected noises, sleeping poorly despite the security presence. The carefree teenager was being systematically replaced by someone hyper-vigilant and wary. Online, the attacks reached new levels of coordination and viciousness. Doctored photos appeared showing Zara at fictional parties with alcohol and drugs. A fake academic transcript circulated suggesting she had failed multiple classes before her father intervened. Anonymous accounts claimed to be former classmates recounting instances of bullying and entitlement. "They're trying to destroy your character," Meyer observed as they monitored the digital onslaught, "make you too toxic for anyone to support." The threats weren't limited to Zara. Marcus began receiving calls from unknown numbers at all hours, sometimes with just silence on the line. Sometimes with recordings of private conversations he'd had in supposedly secure locations. The message was clear. Nowhere was truly private. Nowhere was completely safe. The pressure took a physical toll. After a particularly intense week of depositions and countering new legal maneuvers from Skyline, Marcus experienced chest pains severe enough to warrant an emergency room visit. Though diagnosed as stress-induced and not a heart attack, the episode terrified Zara, who suddenly faced the possibility of fighting this battle without her father's strength beside her. "Maybe we should consider their settlement offer," she suggested during a quiet moment at his hospital bedside. Guilt gnawing at her as she watched him lying there somehow smaller than the father who had always seemed invincible. Marcus reached for her hand. "Is that what you want?" Zara hesitated. "I want you to be okay. I want our lives back. I'm scared of what they'll do next." "That's exactly what they're counting on," Marcus replied gently. "Fear is their most effective weapon, more powerful than any legal argument they could make." Before Zara could respond, her phone buzzed with an alert from their home security system in Chicago. The camera feed showed broken glass at the rear entrance. someone had forced their way inside. Police were automatically dispatched, but by the time they arrived, the intruders were gone, along with Marcus's home office computer and several files related to the case. "This isn't random," Eleliana stated when informed of the break-in. "They're looking for vulnerabilities in our case, trying to access privileged information." The escalation continued. Jessica Moore's apartment was similarly burglarized. Rebecca Lawson reported being followed by unmarked vehicles. Devin Carter discovered sophisticated spyware installed on his laptop after a suspicious software update notification. Most concerning was the impact on witnesses who had come forward. 3 former Skyline employees who had provided affidavits suddenly recanted, citing misunderstandings and contextual errors. When contacted privately by Eleliana, one broke down in tears, admitting his new employer had received an anonymous tip about reliability issues that could result in termination. "If he continued his involvement in the case, they're systematically intimidating our witnesses," Eleliana reported during an emergency strategy session. "And it's working. People are scared." The legal battle suffered a significant setback when Judge Chen ruled that certain internal documents were inadmissible due to a procedural technicality in how they had been obtained. The decision removed some of their strongest evidence from consideration, though the core of their case remained intact. The public narrative began to shift as well. Articles questioning the merits of the lawsuit appeared in major publications, many written by contributors with undisclosed connections to companies within Skyline's corporate ecosystem. Television pundits debated whether the case represented legitimate grievance or opportunistic exploitation of America's racial tensions. Through all this, Zara struggled to maintain her focus on the principles at stake rather than the personal cost. The Columbia pre-law program she had dreamed of attending had long since started without her. Former friends rarely contacted her anymore, deterred by the controversy surrounding her name. Her social media accounts remained deactivated to prevent further harassment. Then came the most invasive escalation yet. Skyline's attorneys filed a motion to subpoena Zara's personal diaries and journals as part of discovery, claiming they might contain relevant information about her state of mind and expectations regarding the flight. "This is a fishing expedition," Eleliana argued in court. "An attempt to further violate my client's privacy and potentially mine her most personal thoughts for out-of-context statements they can weaponize against her." Skyline's counsel countered that Zara had placed her emotional state at issue by claiming distress damages, making her private reflections relevant to assessing the legitimacy of those claims. After lengthy arguments, Judge Chen issued a limited ruling allowing Skyline access to journal entries specifically relating to the flight and its aftermath, with provisions for ENC camera review of sensitive content before disclosure to the defense team. For Zara, this felt like the final violation. Strangers pouring through her private thoughts, looking for ways to twist her words against her. That evening alone in her room, while the legal team worked in the adjoining suite, she found herself questioning whether any principle was worth this level of personal destruction. Marcus found her there, staring blankly at the wall, her usual resilience visibly diminished. "I've been thinking about what happens if we lose," she said without preamble. "They've already taken so much. My privacy, my future at Columbia, your health, our sense of safety. What if we go through all this and they still win?" Marcus sat beside her on the edge of the bed. Winning and losing isn't always clear-cut in cases like this. Sometimes the victory is in forcing the truth into the light, even if the legal outcome isn't what we hoped for. But at what cost, Zara pressed, is it worth destroying our lives? Marcus considered his daughter's question with the seriousness it deserved. "That's something only you can answer. We started this because you refused to give up your seat when you had every right to keep it. That stand was about dignity and justice. The question now is whether those principles are still worth fighting for, given what we know about the price." Zara was silent for a long moment. "If we stop now, what happens to the next person who doesn't have our resources? What happens to the Jessica Moores of the world who risk everything to do the right thing? What message does our surrender send?" Despite his exhaustion, pride bloomed in Marcus's eyes. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you," all the way. Before Zara could respond, Maya burst into the room. Her expression a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "You need to see this right now," she insisted, thrusting her tablet forward. On the screen was a breaking news headline that would change everything. Exclusive leaked recording shows Skyline CEO using racial slurs when discussing Johnson case. The accompanying article detailed an anonymous submission to multiple media outlets containing audio from what appeared to be an executive meeting where Thomas Wilson, believing himself among allies, had referred to the Johnsons and their supporters with language so explicitly racist it couldn't be quoted directly in mainstream reporting. Within hours, the recording was authenticated by audio forensic experts, and the corporate crisis that had been simmering for weeks erupted into an inferno of public outrage that no PR strategy could contain. The leaked recording of Thomas Wilson spread across the internet with the uncontainable force of a digital wildfire. In the 20-second clip, Wilson could be heard dismissing the discrimination allegations with language so explicitly racist that major news networks could only refer to it obliquely as deeply offensive and racially charged terminology. The anonymous source had also included damning footage from a board meeting where Wilson and other executives discussed their passenger aesthetic management strategies in callously frank terms. "Our top-tier customers pay for a certain experience," Wilson stated in the video. "Part of that experience is being surrounded by people they feel comfortable with. That's not racism, it's business." Within hours of the recording's release, Skyline Airways' carefully constructed defense began to collapse. Corporate sponsors announced they were suspending their partnerships. Celebrities publicly cancelled their Skyline frequent flyer memberships. A coalition of civil rights organizations called for a complete boycott of the airline until leadership changes were implemented. Inside Skyline headquarters, chaos reigned. Emergency board meetings were convened as executives turned against each other, each trying to distance themselves from the growing scandal. The stock price plummeted so rapidly that trading was temporarily halted to prevent a complete freefall. "The tide has turned," Devon Carter told the Johnson team as they watched the crisis unfold. "They can't spin this away or intimidate it into silence." Eleliana's phone rang constantly with calls from Skyline's legal team. Their tone dramatically shifted from confident obstruction to desperate damage control. The settlement offers increased exponentially with each call, no longer contingent on confidentiality agreements or limited admissions of wrongdoing. "They're in full retreat," she confirmed. The question now is how we leverage this moment to create meaningful change, not just extract compensation. The Department of Transportation announced a formal investigation into Skyline seating policies, including a comprehensive review of passenger data to identify patterns of discrimination. Congressional leaders called for hearings on discriminatory practices in the airline industry, more broadly citing the Johnson case as evidence of potential systemic issues requiring regulatory intervention. Black Star Airlines publicly terminated Richard Holloway, issuing a statement condemning discrimination and denying any knowledge of his personal actions regarding the incident with Zara. Industry analysts recognized this for what it was: throwing Holloway under the proverbial bus to create distance from the scandal. For the Johnson family, the sudden shift in momentum brought cautious optimism, but also heightened security concerns. Eleliana warned that cornered adversaries often became more dangerous, not less. Their security team identified multiple surveillance attempts and possible tampering with their secure communications, suggesting that despite the public retreat, private efforts to undermine their case continued. The most unexpected development came from within Skyline itself. Amanda Chen, the airline's chief communications officer and a 20-year veteran of the company, resigned publicly with a scathing statement that corroborated many of the Johnsons' allegations. "I can no longer represent an organization whose leadership has demonstrated such fundamental disregard for basic human dignity." Her statement read, "The discriminatory practices revealed in this case are not anomalies or the actions of rogue employees, but reflections of an institutional culture that I can no longer in good conscience defend or deny." Chen's resignation triggered a cascade effect. Other executives began distancing themselves either through resignation or by providing information to investigators under condition of anonymity. The internal documents now flowing into Aleliana's office painted a picture of discrimination far more deliberate and widespread than even their initial evidence had suggested. Facing insurmountable pressure, Skyline's board of directors called an emergency vote that resulted in Thomas Wilson being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The company announced the appointment of an interim CEO and the formation of an independent ethics committee to review all customer service policies for potential discriminatory impact. During what should have been a moment of triumph, Marcus suffered another health episode, this one serious enough to require overnight hospitalization. As Zara sat beside his hospital bed, she reflected on the price they had paid for this fight, wondering if the potential victory would justify the payontto. No regrets, Marcus told her, reading her expression with paternal intuition, despite his weakened state. Some battles choose you, Zara. This one chose us, and we fought it the best way we know how. The following morning, Judge Chen called both legal teams to her chambers for an unusual off-record discussion. With the case now playing out as much in the court of public opinion as in her courtroom, she urged consideration of a resolution that would address the systemic issues rather than focus solely on monetary damages. There's an opportunity here for meaningful industry reform, she suggested. That possibility deserves serious consideration as you contemplate your next steps. Aleliana presented the judge's perspective to the Johnson family, along with Skyline's latest settlement offer, $50 million of public admission of wrongdoing termination of all executives involved in developing or implementing the discriminatory policies and a commitment to third-party oversight of new equity-focused customer service protocols. It's the most comprehensive settlement I've seen in 20 years of civil rights litigation, Aleliana acknowledged. But there's something missing that money can't buy. Accountability, Zara stated quietly. Real accountability, not just corporate damage control. Marcus, still moving carefully, following his hospitalization, nodded in agreement. The executives responsible walk away wealthy. The company writes off the settlement as a business expense, and in a year, this becomes a case study in crisis management rather than a turning point for industry practices. Their counter-proposal was bold. They would accept a significantly reduced financial settlement if Skyline would agree to fundamental structural changes, including diversity requirements for board composition, transparent reporting of passenger demographic data, and seating assignments, regular civil rights audits by independent entities, and formation of a passenger advocacy council with meaningful oversight authority. We're not interested in bankrupting the company, Marcus explained when presenting their terms. We want to transform it into an example of what corporate accountability and genuine commitment to equality can look like. The board's initial response was skeptical, but as boycotts expanded and shareholders demanded resolution, their position softened. After intense negotiations, they agreed to most of the structural changes while insisting on a confidentiality agreement regarding the specific financial terms. As the final settlement documents were being prepared, a breaking news alert appeared on every screen in the conference room. Federal grand jury indicts former Skyline CEO Thomas Wilson and Blackstar executive Richard Holloway on conspiracy and civil rights violations. The indictment detailed a years-long pattern of collusion between the two executives to implement discriminatory practices across multiple airlines while concealing their actions from regulators and shareholders. The federal prosecutors had built their case independent of the civil litigation, drawing on evidence that extended far beyond the single incident involving Zara. For the Johnson family, this development transcended their individual case, elevating what had begun as a personal stand for dignity into a potential watershed moment for corporate accountability. The industry practices that had once seemed immutable were now subject to both legal scrutiny and public condemnation in ways that promised lasting change. As the news of the indictment spread, Marcus received a call from the newly appointed interim CEO of Skyline Airways, Catherine Daniels, the first black woman to lead a major American airline. "We have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust," she acknowledged frankly. I was hoping you might consider joining our newly formed Ethics Advisory Board. We need voices like yours as we reshape our corporate culture. The invitation represented a remarkable transformation from adversary to potential partner in reform. After thoughtful consideration, Marcus agreed, seeing an opportunity to influence change from within rather than solely through external pressure. For Zara, watching her father embrace this unexpected role brought a sense of closure that no financial settlement could have provided. Their fight had never been about money or revenge, but about creating a world where people were judged by the tickets they held rather than the color of their skin. As autumn arrived in New York, Zara received a letter from Columbia University. Her deferred admission had been reinstated with the option to begin the spring semester if she wished. The pre-law program's director included a personal note. Your commitment to justice outside the classroom has been the most compelling demonstration of the qualities we seek to develop within it. The road ahead remained challenging. The structural changes they had fought for would require vigilant monitoring to ensure implementation beyond surface-level compliance. The publicity surrounding the case had permanently altered their family's privacy and sense of security. The health issues Marcus had developed under the stress of the battle would require ongoing management. Yet, as Zara packed her belongings for the delayed but not denied journey to Columbia, she carried with her a profound understanding that had transformed her from a bright teenager into an emerging advocate. Justice rarely arrived through comfortable pathways, but the difficult route often led to more meaningful destinations. 1 year after the fateful flight that had changed everything, Zara Johnson once again found herself boarding a Skyline Airways plane bound for New York. This time, however, she wasn't traveling as a passenger, but as an invited speaker for the Bye Airlines' completely restructured employee training program on equality and passenger dignity. The transformation of Skyline Airways over the preceding 12 months had been remarkable by any standard. Under Catherine Daniels' leadership, the company had implemented every reform promised in the settlement agreement and voluntarily added others. The passenger demographic management algorithms had been permanently dismantled. Seating policies were now transparent with regular audits by independent civil rights organizations. The board of directors had been reconstituted with diverse membership reflecting the passengers they served. Most significantly, Skyline had established the industry's first passenger equity officer position with authority to investigate complaints and implement binding corrective actions without executive approval. The position had been offered to Marcus Johnson, who declined for ethical reasons, but assisted in developing the role's parameters and selecting a qualified candidate. As Zara settled into her seat first class, though she had offered to travel in economy, she reflected on how differently the crew interacted with all passengers regardless of appearance or status. The performative difference and subtle signals of belonging or exclusion that had once defined the premium cabin experience had been replaced by genuine courtesy extended equally to everyone. "Miss Johnson, welcome aboard." The flight attendant greeted her warmly. "We're honored to have you with us today." The sincerity in her voice reflected more than individual politeness. It embodied the cultural shift that had gradually permeated the company as discriminatory practices were confronted and dismantled. What had once been a legal settlement requirement had evolved into authentic organizational values. The in-flight magazine in her seat pocket featured a cover story about Skyline's journey toward inclusive practices with sidebars, highlighting industry-wide reforms that had followed in their wake. Other major airlines, seeing the public response to Skyline's transformation, had proactively implemented similar changes rather than risk becoming the next discrimination headline. Department of Transportation statistics now included demographic data on passenger complaints and resolution outcomes, creating accountability metrics that companies could no longer ignore. Congress had passed the Passenger Equal Rights Act, establishing clear federal standards for non-discriminatory treatment in air travel with substantial penalties for violations. These systemic changes extended beyond policies and procedures to the lived experiences of thousands of travelers who would never know Zara's name or story, but whose dignity was now protected by structures that had not existed before her stand. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Zara opened her laptop to review her presentation for the incoming class of flight attendants. Titled Beyond the Ticket, Recognizing the Humanity in Every Passenger. It incorporated lessons from her experience while focusing on practical approaches to equitable service. A message from Maya popped up on her screen. Nervous about your speech? You'll be amazing. Changemaker status confirmed. Zara smiled at her friend's encouragement. Maya had leveraged her role in documenting the original incident into a position with a major civil rights organization coordinating their transportation equality initiative. Their friendship forged in that moment of allyship on the flight had deepened into a partnership working towards shared goals from different platforms. Jessica Moore had found her voice as well, transitioning from reluctant whistleblower to sought-after consultant on workplace ethics and corporate culture. The courage that had cost her one career had ultimately launched another, built on her moral clarity and first-hand understanding of institutional resistance to change. For Marcus Johnson, the journey had brought unexpected transformations. His health challenges following the stress of the case had prompted early retirement from corporate law. Instead of returning to the Seawight, he had accepted a position teaching ethics and civil rights law at Northwestern University, finding fulfillment in shaping the next generation of legal advocates. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you actually needed. He had told Zara when explaining his decision, "I spent 20 years helping corporations navigate legal boundaries. Now I get to help students understand why those boundaries matter." The most profound change, however, had been in Zara herself. The traumatic experience that might have diminished her had instead catalyzed growth. The shy, academically focused teenager had discovered an inner strength and clarity of purpose that transformed her educational goals and life trajectory. Upon finally starting at Columbia the previous spring, she had shifted her focus from corporate law to civil rights advocacy, combining academic excellence with practical experience through internships with organizations working on transportation equity issues. Her first-hand experience navigating both discrimination and systemic reform had given her insights that textbooks alone could never provide. As the plane began its descent into JFK Airport, Zara glimpsed the skyline that had once represented only academic ambition, but now symbolized something far more meaningful. The beginning of her journey as an advocate for change. The seat that she had refused to surrender had become the foundation for reforms benefiting countless travelers who would never face the same humiliation she had endured. The aircraft touched down smoothly, and as passengers prepared to disembark, the captain's voice came over the intercom with an announcement that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we arrive in New York, I'd like to acknowledge a special guest on our flight today. Zara Johnson is joining Skyline's training team to share insights that have helped transform not just our airline, but industry practices nationwide. Her courage in standing up for fairness has made air travel more equitable for all of us. We're honored to have her on board." A spontaneous round of applause rippled through the cabin. Passengers recognizing not celebrity, but the impact of principled action on their daily experiences. For Zara, this acknowledgement represented something more valuable than any financial settlement could have provided. Confirmation that standing for dignity, even at great personal cost, could catalyze changes extending far beyond one's individual experience. As she exited the aircraft into the terminal where chaos had once greeted her, Zara was met instead by a group of Skyline's executive leadership and training staff. Among them stood Catherine Daniels, the CEO, whose appointment had signaled the beginning of genuine transformation. "Welcome back to New York." Catherine greeted her warmly. "The new class of flight attendants is eager to hear from you. Your story has become a cornerstone of our corporate identity, not as a cautionary tale of what went wrong, but as inspiration for what we're working to become." Later that afternoon, as Zara stood before a room of trainees in Skyline's Corporate Learning Center, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this unlikely podium. The screen behind her displayed side-by-side images. The viral video of her being confronted about her seat contrasted with recent data showing Skyline's dramatically improved metrics on equal treatment. "My story began with a seat I refused to surrender," she told the attentive audience. But it was never actually about that seat. It was about dignity, about belonging, about the right to occupy spaces we have legitimately earned without justification or apology. She gestured to the before and after statistics behind her. These numbers represent real people whose experiences of air travel have been transformed. People who now board planes without the anxiety of wondering if they'll be questioned, relocated, or humiliated because of how they look. As Zara continued her presentation, she emphasized that meaningful change required more than policies and procedures. It demanded ongoing vigilance, willingness to acknowledge missteps, and genuine commitment to seeing every passenger as equally deserving of respect. The measure of your success won't be found in compliance checklists or diversity statistics. She concluded it will be written in the experiences of passengers who never have to think about whether they belong in the seats they've purchased. That invisible absence of anxiety, that unspoken confirmation of dignity, that's the true standard of equality. The applause that followed reflected more than professional courtesy. It embodied recognition of a fundamental truth Zara had discovered through her ordeal. Systems didn't change through passive acceptance of injustice, but through the courageous actions of individuals willing to stand firm when those systems failed. That evening, Azara looked out over the New York skyline from her hotel room. She opened her laptop to find an email from a first-year law student at Howard University. The message described how learning about the Johnson case had influenced the student's decision to pursue transportation civil rights law, asking for advice on effective advocacy strategies. As Zara began typing her response, she realized that the ripple effect of inspiration flowing outward to others who would carry the work forward in their own ways, might be the most significant outcome of all. The seat she had refused to surrender had become a platform from which others could now launch their own journeys toward justice. The transformation was far from complete. Racial bias hadn't been eliminated from air travel or any other industry. Corporate power still often overwhelmed individual rights. The work of reform remained challenging and ongoing. Yet something fundamental had shifted. What had begun as a teenager's stand for personal dignity had evolved into structural changes affecting thousands. The systems that had once seemed immovable had proven susceptible to pressure when applied with persistence and principle. As Zara finished her email to the law student with words of encouragement, she included the insight that had sustained her through the darkest moments of her fight. Justice rarely comes from comfortable places. It emerges from those moments when we refuse to surrender what rightfully belongs to us: our dignity, our equality, our seat at the table. That refusal, however costly, creates possibilities that extend far beyond our individual experience. Tomorrow, she would board another flight returning to the life and studies that had been interrupted, but ultimately enriched by her unexpected journey into advocacy. The seat she would occupy represented not just her ticket or status, but a small victory in the larger battle for a world where such fights would no longer be necessary. A world where belonging was determined not by appearance or perception, but by the simple human dignity every passenger carried with them when they stepped aboard. Zara Johnson's journey teaches us that true change often begins with one person refusing to accept injustice. When she stood her ground against discrimination, what started as a personal stand for dignity transformed into a movement that revolutionized an entire industry. This story reminds us that systems of discrimination, no matter how entrenched, can be dismantled when confronted with courage, evidence, and persistence. The power of allies cannot be overstated. Ma's decision to record the incident, Jessica's willingness to risk her career by speaking truth, and the countless others who eventually came forward, transformed one family's fight into a collective movement for justice. When people unite against injustice, even the most powerful corporations cannot withstand the pressure. Digital evidence and social media proved crucial in exposing the truth. While these tools can be weaponized to attack victims, they can also democratize access to justice when used strategically. The unedited videos that contradicted the airline's narrative ultimately helped shift public opinion and legal outcomes. Perhaps most importantly, this story demonstrates that meaningful change requires structural reform, not just individual accountability. While removing biased executives was necessary, the lasting impact came through new policies, oversight mechanisms, and industry regulations that protect all passengers regardless of race. The hardest battles often create the most significant leaders. Zara entered that flight as a student, but emerged as an advocate whose experience now educates others. Her willingness to endure personal attacks and sacrifice comfort for principle rippled outward, inspiring a new generation of activists and reformers. This story ultimately shows us that justice is not merely about winning legal victories, but about transforming systems to prevent future injustice. The seat Zara refused to surrender became a platform from which broader change could launch, reminding us that individual courage can indeed alter the trajectory of society. Have you ever stood up against discrimination when it would have been easier to stay silent or witness someone else's brave stand against injustice? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might inspire others to find their own courage in difficult moments. If this account of standing firm against systemic racism resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and transformation. By sharing these narratives, we help create a world where such fights become less necessary. Thank you for joining us on Zara's journey from humiliation to vindication. Remember, change doesn't always come from those with the most power. Often, it begins with one person who simply refuses to surrender their dignity. Until next time, may we all find the strength to stand for what's right, even when we stand alone.